Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter for the Boston Globe Spotlight team. In more than 2 decades with the Globe, he has worked as a reporter and editor covering presidential, state, and local politics. As a member of the Spotlight team, he has played a key role in many of the Globe's most significant investigations, including those probing the September 11 attacks, financial corruption in the nation's charitable foundations, and abuse in the debt collection industry. In 2003, Mike shared a Pulitzer Prize for revealing the cover-up of sexual abuse in the Catholic Church. The movie Spotlight was made on that investigation and won the Best Film that year. Before joining the Globe, Mike was staff writer at Washington Post, San Jose Mercury News, and the Boston Phoenix, and was the editor of the East Boston Community News. He is co-author of 2 books, Betrayal, The Crisis in the Catholic Church, and Sin Against the Innocents, Sexual Abuse by Priests and the Role of the Catholic Church. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Rezendes. Some of my questions will have context of the film. Those of you who've seen the film will probably, know the context. Those of you who haven't, it's just for your benefit. Mike, in the film, there's one line where, I forget the character who says, when you want to do the story, says, the church thinks in centuries. Does your paper have those resources?
The church thinks in centuries, Mr. Rezendes. Do you think your paper has the resources to take that on?
Yeah, I do. But if you don't mind me asking, do you?
Now, it's been close to 20 years, maybe 17 years, 15 years since the story. Do you see that? Because what happened in Australia, you just tweeted this morning on a fresh development on this story. Is the church too powerful? And since it's thinking in centuries, can any publication fight that battle?
Well, I think we've proven that you can. However, this is an important question. The church does think in centuries, and I do think there are a lot of people in the Vatican today who still believe that they can wait this out. I think there are people in the Vatican who are saying, well, look, we've been here 2,000 years. The Boston Globe has been here 150 years. Soon this will go away. Everyone will forget about it, and we'll get back to business as usual. I do think that is a prevailing attitude within the church, and I think it's one of the reasons the Vatican hasn't really done anything in a substantive way yet. So I think it's important to keep the focus on this issue. It's one of the reasons I love the movie so much. It's kept the focus on the Vatican all over the world, and I think it's really, really important.
Okay, now in the film, and I'm assuming it's based on fact, you were fond of going to church. It was special to you, it meant something to you. And there's this moment where you kind of break down, you unravel on thinking that you will start going to church again. Sasha Pfeiffer, that's your colleague, whose grandmother is a devout Catholic, has a personal dilemma on working on a story while going to church with her every now and then. What were your personal battles and were there consequences? A, how has it affected your personal faith? And how did it affect how your team covered the story? Did you get over-defensive or over-aggressive to compensate?
Well, it's a good question. As it turned out, all of us, the 4 people you see in the movie, all of us were raised Catholic. I think by the time we did this project, we were lapsed Catholics. I mean, I wasn't going to church every Sunday. But I think we all identified as Catholics. And certainly, as you see Sasha's grandmother, but certainly people in our families identified as Catholics. I mean, my family, both my mother's side and father's side, I would describe as devout Catholics. So it did really hit home. I don't think we were defensive. I think, in a way, being Catholic helped because we understood the deference that people had to the Catholic Church. For instance, some people would say to us, well, gosh, how could anyone leave their children alone with a Catholic priest? But as Catholics, we knew that in the Catholic community, a priest was the one person you would trust alone with your children. The Catholic priest was the most trusted person in the community. So we didn't have to try to understand that. We didn't have a big learning curve. We intuitively understood how this could happen. Personally, I think the movie is very, very accurate. I wasn't happy with a lot of the personal stuff in the movie at first, but it's very, very accurate, and now I'm glad it's in there. But You know, it really was a shattering experience. It was a faith-shattering experience. There's no question about it.
What's your relationship with your faith like now, or with the church, personally?
Well, now I really don't have a relationship with the Catholic Church except as a reporter. You know,
Okay, you have also done an investigation which also won awards on collection agencies. It happened in India as well. There were hard collection agencies that use unorthodox methods to get the loan back. So one of Mike's investigations was on that. Clearly, the Wall Street is very strong. The financial world is very strong entity in world politics and in the power dynamic of the world. And corporate America, as corporate India, and corporations around the world try to kill stories. What were the challenges in that? And what is more powerful, the church or capitalism?
Well, you raise an interesting issue here, and I was listening to some of the folks earlier at a panel here talk about the digital age in journalism. And, you know, we are at a point where journalism is at a crossroads. And certainly in the United States, journalism is weaker financially than it has been in the past. You know, I love the internet, and I have a lot of great new tools that I can use as an investigative reporter, but the internet really has destroyed the revenue model for most news organizations in America. And this means there's a certain financial weakness. You know, I think media has to be strong. Media has to be also, it has to be well-funded in order to do successful reporting against institutions like the Catholic Church and also corporations. You know, if you're going to be an investigative news organization in the United States, sooner or later you're going to get sued for libel. And this is costly. You know, it costs money to buy libel insurance, and it costs money to defend yourself in court. Also, in the case of our investigation of the Catholic Church, we went to court proactively in order to get some documents unsealed. And this is expensive. You know, it's expensive to hire a good law firm to go to court on behalf of the public. So it's really important that we solve some of the problems we're seeing in media today. And by that I mean some of the financial problems. We really do need a way to fund investigative reporting so that investigative reporting organizations are strong enough to defend themselves and essentially to go up against powerful institutions like the Catholic Church and wealthy institutions like the various corporations you're talking about. This is really an important problem.
Right. In this particular story, your investigation, one of the key evidence or documents were public records that you got access to with the judge's intervention. So in a sense, investigations are, I won't use the word easier, but there is a system that facilitates access to documents that are supposed to be public. Then there are other democracies that may not be as evolved, where a document that is supposed to be public, there's no way you can get it. The system doesn't work. Like the Freedom of Information Act in the US probably works better than the Right to Information Act in India. In a situation like that, if you cannot get the documents that are the clincher to your story, do you carry the story without those documents? Is it more important getting the story out without those documents? Because in a society where or a country where they can easily be blocked, what would you do?
Well, sometimes you can find people who will give you the source, give you the documents. I mean, then you're in a situation where you got to cultivate sources who have access to the documents and have them give you the documents. You know, I think this was the case with the Panama Papers investigation. I mean, these were not public documents per se, but there were some very good sources that were developed in Panama, and so these documents eventually found their way into public view. But this required some excellent reporting. So you just have to use your skills, your ingenuity to try to get someone who has access to the documents to give them to you. The great thing about the documents is that they will prove your story. You know, a story to be successful, it has to be true, and also it has to be able to convince people it's true. Without facts, we really don't have very much. I mean, if we're just going to publish stories based on anonymous sources, we run the risk that people are not going to believe us. We open ourselves up to charges that we've fabricated the sources. But if you have the documents, you're in a very, very strong position. So, if I was reporting on a story and there was no way to get the records in the public realm, then I'd be looking for a source who could give them to me.
In one case, during your spotlight investigation of the Catholic Church, you give an assurance to the lawyer that he can sit in on an interview, and if he doesn't like it, he can kill it. Now, those are dilemmas reporters often feel, that I will only give you this interview if I get an approval or if I can get a sign-off. And I understand it's a judgment call. Sometimes it's because you aren't really investigating the person you're interviewing, but that's the source to get to the person you are. But it's not always so black and white, whereas there have been cases in our country where a politician wanted certain questions asked in an interview and certain not. When is it okay for a journalist to give such an assurance that if you don't like the interview, you can kill it? And when would it be a breach of journalistic integrity?
Well, usually I would say it's probably not okay if it's the only interview you're going to do. But in my situation with Mitch Garabedian, this was a long-term process where I was trying to develop trust. And so I was willing to say, okay, I just wanted to get inside any way I could. Let me talk to your clients. You want to kill the interview, kill the interview. You want it off the record, it can be off the record. And eventually, because I made that agreement, he let me interview his clients. And as I interviewed his clients, we got to know each other a lot better, and that trust began to develop. And so after a while, Mitch wasn't even sitting in on the interviews. I would just go into his office, and he had a room there, and I would sit with his clients, and he wasn't even there. And the other thing that happened repeatedly is you see in the movie when I interview this victim, Patrick McSorley, at first I agree I won't use his name, and at the end of the interview he says, hey, it's okay to use my name, just get these guys. And so I think this is a human process. If you know you're going to come back tomorrow, and you're going to come back the next day, and you're going to come back next week, then I think it's okay to make these agreements initially and hope you can get to a place where people trust you and feel comfortable talking to you.
But finally, whether you will keep your word or not will depend on a journalist's judgment for public good. Is that right?
No, I'll always keep my word. I mean, if I give my word, I'm going to keep my word. I mean, I don't get to a place where I say, well, I told this guy I was off the record, but it's in the public interest for me to violate my agreement with him and get the story out there. That's just not, I just don't operate that way. And I think people know that, and that's one of the reasons people talk to me. My word is really, I've been doing this for more years than I want to count at this point, but I do have a reputation, and it's really why people come to me, because they know I can be trusted.
Okay, one last question before we open this out to the audience. When should an investigative reporter let a story go? Because not every investigation leads to a report. And if you have invested a certain amount of time and resources into it, there is the pressure of what's your editor going to say, what is the publisher going to say, or just because you want to nail someone. How often have you been faced with that dilemma? And what has made you let the story go? How difficult has it been?
Well, this is really a very important question for news organizations that have investigative units. You don't want to get in a situation when your investigative team spends 6 months on a project and you realize you have to pull the plug. You don't want to be in that situation. And, like I say, I've done this for a while, so usually I can take a look at something, and within a couple of weeks, I know whether this is a good story for us or not. But there are a couple of questions you have to ask yourself. The first is this a story? And sometimes, always, when you decide that it is a really good story, and it's a story that you want, then there's a second question. The second question is, can we get it? Is it a gettable story? In other words, are there documents? Do we have a way to get documents? Do we have a way in? And if you can't find the way in, then maybe you have to reluctantly pull the plug and just say, hey, look, you know, it sounds like a good story, but I don't know how we're going to get it, and we don't have 6 months to waste here. So what else do we have? What else is on our dance card here? I mean, sometimes you just have to say, looks like a good story, but we just don't see how we're going to do it.
All right, I have several other questions, but I don't want to hog them up. Can we start the young man here?
Hi, Michael. My question to you is, what happens when your publisher gets scared off from putting out a story which indicts, say, one of the largest corporations in the country? As has recently happened, in fact, after the story was published, an Indian journal, the Economic and Political Weekly, got a lawsuit from one of the country's biggest corporations, the Adanis, and decided to take down 2 of their articles, following which the editor, who also authored the article, resigned. But I'm saying before the story gets published, if your publisher says that, hey, you know what, these guys will file a lawsuit, let's just drop it.
So if your story gets killed, do you pass it on to a friend? What do you do with it?
Well, if I were in that situation and I had a story that I thought was important and my publisher wouldn't let us print the story, then I might give it to another reporter who worked for an organization that could publish that story. I might do that.
All right, the young man here.
Hi, Mike. I think one of the things is that with the Spotlight investigation, you guys had a lot of time, you had the resources, and there wasn't any pressure on you to work on something else. Is that something which you think is still possible in today's day and age, with the fact that the media is facing troubles with finances, that it's difficult to actually get a team? How can we try and make sure that that kind of investigative journalism still can be done and can actually produce the kind of work you guys did?
Yeah, that's a good question. As I said before, news organizations are under a lot of financial pressure. But here's the thing about this investigative reporting and Spotlight team. At the Boston Globe, you know, we're under the same pressure that everyone else is. I mean, we have half as many reporters at the Boston Globe as we had 15 years ago. We've had to close all our foreign bureaus. So the situation is very, very serious. But we still have a Spotlight team, and we will still take a year to do a story if we have to. And the reason is we have found that our readers love Spotlight, and they depend on the Boston Globe to hold powerful institutions and powerful people accountable. You know, we have all this tremendous technology now, so when we, at any moment, at any given moment, I can go on a particular website and I can see how many people, to the exact number, are reading which stories on our website, bostonglobe.com. And I can see the average amount of time that people are spending on a story. Now, when this technology was first introduced, I got to tell you, I was worried, because I was thinking to myself, gosh sakes, who's reading a 5,000-word Spotlight story these days? You know, maybe no one. You know, maybe I'm going to, you know, have to quit my job. Maybe there's going to be no more Spotlight team. But to my surprise and joy, and I think the surprise of everyone at the Globe, especially in management, the technology, we're able to see that whenever there's a Spotlight story, it's the most read story on the website, and that people are spending more time on it than they are with anything else. So investigative reporting, I would argue, is good. There's good business around investigative reporting because people want it. And if people want something, I think you can make an argument that they're going to be willing to pay for it. So I think publishers ought to understand that there's some business potential here.
Okay, the young man there, yes.
Hi, thanks so much for your talk. I was wondering, you mentioned that the Spotlight story, the story that the movie, or the investigation that the movie was based on, was one of the first to go viral by posting documents online. And I'm wondering if you have any sense of, if Facebook and Twitter had existed during this investigation, or during Spotlight investigations of similar natures now, how do you go about using social media during the course of your investigation? Would you post some of the insights as the first articles in the series are coming out? Would you wait till the end of it? Would you use it to engage with people?
You know, I don't think we would have done anything a lot differently, to tell you the truth. I mean, we published the first 2 stories, one after the other, January 6th, January 7th, when they were ready. And then we got the 10,000 pages of documents, and we published that when it was ready, as soon as it was ready. And as soon as we had the 4th story on the scope of the problem, we published that as soon as it was ready. So I don't think we would have done anything differently, to tell you the truth, but I think that the stories would have ricocheted around the world with lightning speed. And I think the scandal may have spread around the country and around the world faster than it has if Facebook and Twitter existed back then.
Yeah, just before I come to you, there's a related question. When you were at the climax, both in the film and in the course of your investigation, 9/11 happened. Now, 9/11 wasn't just a terrorist attack. It led to a domino effect of, the clash of civilizations argument, Islam versus Christianity, and with Bush at the helm of affairs, devout, born again. Surely, your team must have felt at this time when America is grieving, they're clinging to religion, there is Islamophobia. At a time like that, to do a story taking on the church I'm not sure how it would play out, but it would definitely be of consequence in your decision to, break the story then. And for example, had 9/11 not happened, do you think this would have been a story 10 times as big?
No, I think the way it worked out was kind of, in an eerie kind of way, perfect for the clergy abuse story. I'll tell you why. Because, at least in the United States, between the bombing of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, 9/11, and the United States invasion of Iraq, there was a period of almost exactly a year. And in that period, there were really no other major news events. And we filled that vacuum with our 600 stories about clergy sexual abuse. So in a strange way, there was a one-year opening for us, just news-wise, and we filled it completely. So I think just oddly enough, the way things worked out was really advantageous for us.
The young man here.
Hi. So I have to say that I was very inspired by you. I've been into journalism since I was a high schooler, and you were one of the people that I read. And one of my best friends, Rachel, would probably freak out if she was also inspired by you. She would freak out if I didn't say hi. If I didn't say hi from her side. But I just wanted to know, so you were talking about the revenue-based model and how that's affecting journalists and news organizations. So, and I've sensed that a lot of news organizations have a lot of biases, kind of based on who they're funded by, or based on who their news organization has affiliations with. Do you think solving the problem and creating a better revenue-based model where news organizations can try to gain more independence from their funders is a solution to news bias, or do you think that there's other reasons for the different organizations having news biases?
Well, I think ideally, I think it's important for news organizations to be independent, and I think we're all kind of looking for new revenue models that can provide enough financing for news organizations to do high quality work and to be independent. Now, no one can be completely independent because the money has to come from somewhere. If you have an advertising model, then your biggest advertiser is a potential source of conflict. If you're working with a nonprofit model, then your biggest donor is a source of potential conflict. What happens if your biggest advertiser decides he doesn't want to see a certain kind of story in the paper? What happens if your biggest donor doesn't want to see a certain kind of story published? So I think there's always a potential for conflict of interest, and there's no way to be free of it completely unless you have someone who is very, very wealthy and very, very independent, which is almost impossible. Everyone's got an interest. But I think as much independence as you can get, I think the better off you are as a news organization, without any doubt.
Actually, we'll have a session on that, on new models. Incidentally, Newslaundry is trying a new model, so subscribe to Newslaundry. And support our news model. Sorry, just using your stardom to plug our product. The young lady here, please.
Hello, sir. Okay, so the purpose of this kind of investigative journalism is not to turn people into atheists, right? The purpose is not to make people question their faith. However, the problem with faith is that whenever we deal with these kind of stories, a bigger section of people tend to go into denial. They will deny. They will think that this is a propaganda. And we have faced this in India. Whenever we have a God man, a person who claimed to be a God man, against whom a constitutional, institutional case is going on in the court. But there are still people in the capital who are sitting there and they say that the person was right, a God man was right, and the people who are doing this case against him and the media has a propaganda against this person. My question is, how do you think that, what are we supposed to do with this public opinion? So we have facts, we have documents. In your case, you did. But still, the public most of the time, might not be willing to believe it, right? They go into denial. And the problem with that is that the larger picture, we are missing it out. These people get the benefit of this particular...
Yeah, I get it. So I guess, what she's saying is that in case of faith, it's a lot more unshakable, although increasingly, politicians are also becoming gods. But if you do a story against an organization who I liked, I may believe your story. But if you do a story against my faith, I will reject any evidence you have because my faith will say that's propaganda. When it comes to faith, is it a lot more difficult to make your story believable to people who'd rather believe faith? She's talking about godmen in India, who you do a story against them. The believers will say, no, that's nonsense.
Well, here's the interesting thing about our story, and I think this has a lot to do with getting the documents and getting proof that your story is accurate. Because what happened in our case is, I don't really think we shook anyone's Catholic faith. I think what happened is that people became very, very angry at Cardinal Law because he had sullied an institution, a faith that they loved very much. So, I think people, for the most part, directed their anger at the right place, which was at Cardinal Law. But you are right. There's some people that you're just never going to convince, you're never going to persuade, because they're not willing to look at the facts, and they're incapable of accepting reality. And for a person like that, there really isn't that much you can do about it. The best thing you can do is present verifiable, provable facts. And, beyond that, there really isn't anything else a journalist can do.
The gentleman over there, Prashant.
I have a quick question about the business model of investigative news. It's slow, plodding work. You need time, you need patience, you need resources, you need to cover your bases as far as libel cases and so on are concerned. Do you think crowdfunding is at all a possible alternative to all the other models that have been there or have been tried? Crowdfunding for investigative news.
You're saying, do I think crowdfunding is viable?
Yes. Do you think there is any water in that?
I have not heard of any great successes with crowdfunding, to tell you the truth, when it comes to investigative reporting. Investigative reporting, as you said, it's time-consuming and it's expensive. I think Marty Barron, who was the editor of the Globe when we did our investigation of the Catholic Church, he estimated that it cost $1 million to do that investigation, to have 8 reporters working full-time, to have lawyers. That was $1 million undertaking. So it's really important that we find ways to finance credible news organizations and investigative reporting with a really strong mechanism, either with a subscription model, an advertising model, a donor nonprofit model. We need something that works in kind of a big way. And to my mind, crowdsourcing has not been the answer.
My question is related. The institutional backing for an investigation in India just doesn't come. You're not allowed to spend 6 months on a story. The team of lawyers and reporters that you got just doesn't come. I've been at it for a long time, and I know it doesn't happen. The pressure of bylines, the pressure of productivity, what have you been doing, and the teamwork and team of lawyers, and as you said, the expensive court documents were gotten out. This just doesn't happen in Indian media. How do you counter that? How do you counter that? How do you work around that?
I'm not sure I heard everything you were saying.
What she's saying is that the kind of institutional backing that the economics of news allows in the US, where you can commit a certain amount of resources which are substantial, close to $1 million on a story. In India, no news organization will give you that backing. And there are economic models that would make it unviable for them to run. How do you overcome that? Because then you don't have the resources, so you don't do any exposés like that. Therefore, you don't get the kind of traction. Therefore, you don't have the resources. It's like this vicious circle. How do you break out of that?
Well, it's a big problem. I mean, we all have to work at finding the revenue model that's going to work to finance the kind of journalism that any functioning democracy needs. I mean, in the meantime, you do what we can. I mean, not every investigation takes a year. Not every investigation takes 6 months. This is partly what I was saying before. Sometimes there's a good story there, but you have to decide if you can't get it, then you got to move on to something else. I mean, if you only have, say, 2 weeks, I'm sure there's an important story you can do in 2 weeks. So I think you just have to sharpen your skills and discipline yourself to do the stories that can have a positive effect, that you're capable of doing and that your organization is capable of doing. At the Boston Globe now, I said we still have the Spotlight team, which we do, but we also have this thing that's like a rapid response team where it's 3 reporters and they don't do projects that take a year or take 6 months. They do projects that might take 6 weeks. They do projects that might take 6 days because there are investigative projects, stories that you can turn in a short period of time. So if I were working for a news organization that didn't have the resources to fund a 6-month project or a year-long investigation, then I would do the investigative stories that we can do. And they are out there. I mean, you can do a lot of good working on a story for 2 weeks.
Yeah, there's a panel at 2:30, making news viable. A lot of those answers may come. I'm being told to wind up, but I just have one more question. 2, actually. In the film, it says you run to work. Do you run to work?
Well, I am a runner, and I try to run a marathon a year, sometimes 2. And I don't actually run to work because it's not possible. I live the other side of the Boston Harbor from the Boston Globe.
So you swim to work?
I'd have to swim a mile if I were going to run to work.
And is investigation harder or easier in Trump's America? The fact that he just tweets out what he needs to tweet out, or is his attempt at weakening institutions? How do you see this chapter, a very interesting chapter in American politics, as an investigative reporter?
Well, I'll say a couple of things about that. One, I mean, Trump's given us a lot to investigate. So, in a way, this is a wonderful time to be an investigative reporter in the United States of America. And it is sort of a golden time for investigative reporting. There are many news organizations that are have been inspired to do their very best work. And it's wonderful to see all the great work that is being done. But I do worry about the environment that Trump is creating. I do worry about the very polarized society that's developing in America. And I think the thing that I worry about most is this notion that, we touched on this a little bit with one of the previous questions, this notion that there are people who are simply not going to be persuaded by the facts. I think Trump is encouraging a world where there's almost an alternate reality that's not based on the facts. It's based on ideology. And I find that troubling, and I find it dangerous.
Thanks, Mike. It's a pleasure and an honor meeting you.